Well, hey everybody, good morning and welcome to Lake Oconee Church, both in person and online on what is a November Masters weekend. I hopefully won't get to say that again ever in my life, but thought I needed to say it this time around. It's typically in May for those of you who are not golfers, but one thing you may not know is that every single week, even in the middle of COVID, we have guests that attend with us here in the service and online. So if you're our guest today and we haven't met yet, my name is Andy. I'm so glad that you're here. And we have a gift prepared for you, something that you can grab quickly as you head out this morning. So when you leave, you'll go by the studio, which is the glass room, and you can swing in there quickly and grab that gift. It's something I think you'll enjoy using during the course of this week. So you'll definitely want to stop in and get that before you go. And then for those of you who are our guests online, you can go to guest.lakeoconee.church and you'll be able to get a gift that way that we'll email your direction. It's something small I think you'll enjoy as well, but it's just a small way that we can say thank you for being a part of our service today. Now, as we jump into our service, this morning's message is all about how to find hope and a strategy for maybe a better end to this year and a better beginning of the next. And we're going to sing an encouraging song at the beginning and at the end to kind of sandwich it together. It'll be a little shorter service today because I know a lot of folks are focused on what's happening over about an hour away in Augusta. But it is still something I think you'll find very helpful and encouraging. Now, what you hear today will be a little preview of what will happen on November 29th, because November 29th, we are not having a morning service, none of our morning services that day, but instead, we're having a 4 p.m. night of worship outdoors in our parking lot. So if you enjoy the music today, you'll definitely want to be a part of that service on November 29th at 4 p.m. outdoors, and you can attend in your car or in your chair, whatever is most comfortable for you, but that'll be a really fun post-Thanksgiving experience that I hope you'll plan for. So as you add that to your calendar, if you would, stand to your feet and we'll get this service started.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to jump in this morning, sing this song together. It's a great reminder who God is, His faithfulness to us. I'd love for you to join us. Here we go. Promise maker, promise keeper, you finish what you begin. In our provision through the desert, you see it through till the end.
Thanks for singing with us, and if you would, go ahead and have a seat. I don't know about you, but for me, I love new technology. I love working with technology. I love figuring it out and trying it out. But there's one piece of technology that is incredibly frustrating to me, and it's my map app. Now, I've used a variety of different map apps, but the one that I use most frequently, it's frustrating to me because I know where I'm headed, so I enter my destination in. But then as I get started, especially in a town that I'm not super familiar with, when I begin that trip, it tells me how to start, but it's always super vague. So I start the trip and it says, head south. Well, the whole reason I'm using a map app is because I don't know which way south actually is. And so as I begin to pull out onto the road, I just have to pick a direction and begin heading down that road. And for a few minutes, there's this period of uncertainty, of confusion. I know where I'm headed, but I'm not sure if I'm actually going in the right direction. And I have to head in that direction, see how it calibrates to whether I'm going correctly or not. And the same thing happens, if you overshoot a road that you were supposed to turn at, and then it says it's recalculating, which that's a really good thing. You want it to do that. But if it has trouble finding service or coming up with a new idea, then you're heading in that direction for a little while until you find out, hey, I really am going the right way, or, oh, now I have a turn to make. So you know where you're headed, but then in the meantime, there's this period of confusion. And for a lot of us, whether we're Jesus followers or not, that's a lot of how we've experienced 2020. We know what we'd like it to look like, but then there's this confusion that we're in, and we don't know exactly how things are going to turn out. And for a lot of us, if we were to wave a wand, we'd probably wish for some of the same stuff. We would wish for health and healing from the pandemic. That would be kind of a universal. Everybody wants that worldwide. We would wish for peaceful, pleasing outcome to the election. That being pleasing to me or pleasing to you or wherever it was that we voted from, that's our desire. For others of us, it would be hope for the holidays and for a pleasant new year. That would be what we would wish if we could somehow wave a wand and pick a destination. But even if these are the destinations we pick, there's this period of confusion in the meantime. How do we ever get there? And I think that we can find some clarity in the words of a song that were written by a man named Hezekiah. And these words are enshrined in the Jewish Bible, what we refer to as the Old Testament. And they were written by a guy named Hezekiah. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Hezekiah so you've got some awareness of who this guy was. When he was 25, he became king of this southern kingdom called Judah. Now, at that time, the nation of Israel was divided into two parts. There was the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called Judah. And the capital of Judah was Jerusalem. And that was the kingdom over which Hezekiah was the ruler. At 25, that's extraordinary. But within 3 years, Hezekiah watched as the northern kingdom was taken over by the Assyrian army. And so for the remainder of his reign, he's looking out his window every day saying, is this the day they come for me? And they didn't do pleasant things to the rulers of a country when they got taken over. So Hezekiah lived every day in a little bit of fear and a little bit of nervousness of what was going to happen next. And then 11 years later, that day came. And Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, came to take over the southern kingdom. And they sieged some of the most fortified cities, kind of as a demonstration to Hezekiah that they were on their way. So Hezekiah did what only he could imagine to do. And he put together the most valuable possessions he could find, some of the things from the royal treasury and some of the religious icons, and he put all of that together and he tried to pay off Sennacherib so that Sennacherib might leave him alone. Sennacherib took all the stuff and said, "We're still coming for you." And he encamped with thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers in his army to demonstrate the sheer mass and strength with which he could take over this southern kingdom. And then he made his threats incredibly loud and clear so that anybody that was listening would understand. And he went so far as to challenge Hezekiah's God. And he said, even your God didn't protect the northern kingdom, so there's no way that your God will show up to protect you. So at that moment, Hezekiah had done everything he could imagine. And so he puts on the traditional garb of the repentant and grieving person. He puts on sackcloth, burlap, and he heads to the temple. And he falls down inside the temple to pray. And he begs God to somehow intervene in this circumstance for his country, to intervene in this circumstance for himself. And over the next few days, the challenges continued. The saber rattling continued. And Hezekiah wakes up one morning, and he looks out as he often did, wondering if today would be the day. But as he looks out his window, he doesn't see the Assyrian army anymore. Because hours earlier, as the Assyrian army had opened up their tents and they looked out, what they found was that 185,000 of their fellow soldiers were dead. Not an arrow was fired. They were simply dead. And so the Assyrians had packed up and they had headed back home. And Hezekiah, as he looks out his window, he realizes that God has miraculously intervened. And so, while it's fresh on his mind, he pens the words of this song that we have enshrined for us in Psalm 46. This is what he says: God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Here's what Hezekiah realized. He realized that he could trust God no matter what in the biggest of circumstances. That's what we teach our elementary kids, that we can trust God no matter what. But Hezekiah, he understood it in real time that day. And so he recorded it. God is our refuge, and he is our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Now, sometimes it's easy to assume that God is incredibly powerful, but also incredibly distant. And that he observes what's happening only in bits and pieces and only from far away. But Hezekiah didn't see it that way. He saw God as being incredibly present in his circumstances, nearby, right there, able and willing to help. Our refuge and our strength in trouble. God was not distant and unconcerned. Instead, he was very much involved. And Hezekiah unfolds two different scenarios that are very similar to things that we've experienced as we walk through 2020. He says this: therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. Hezekiah says very simply, if there are storms, if there are earthquakes, if there are tsunamis, if there are pandemics, God is still our refuge. Look what he says. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way and the mountains fall. He says, even if the bad things happen, we still believe that God is present. We still believe that he's our refuge and our strength. Sometimes for you and I, it's easy to go, well, if the bad thing didn't happen, then God showed up. But if the bad thing did happen, well, God must not have been powerful enough to intervene. But Hezekiah said, even when bad things happen, God is our refuge, and we will not fear. So he says, if bad things happen on the planet, we're not going to fear. And then he lays out the second scenario. And he says, nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He, God, lifts his voice, and the earth melts. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. As Hezekiah is writing, he's unfolding a real-time illustration for him. He saw God step in what was an imminent battle. And in the middle of that battle, God brought peace. There was no conflict. There was no war that unfolded in front of them. Hezekiah saw God bring peace in an incredibly tense situation. And he said, all God has to do is lift his voice. And it doesn't matter what the strategy of the leaders are at that moment. God is more powerful than the most carefully laid plans. So Hezekiah continues and describes God this way. He, God, says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. I'm going to be exalted while the rulers strategize. And I'm going to be exalted while the storms rage. And here's my invitation to you, God says. I want you to be still and know that I am God. Literally, this means cease striving. And so many of us find ourselves there. We battle. We battle to create peace, to create calm, to somehow manufacture a sense that it's all going to be okay. And God says, cease striving. Stop working so hard. And instead, I want you to be still and know that I am God. Literally, it means I want you to stand by and watch as I show up. So stop trying to rig it all yourself, but instead observe where I show up and what I do. Now, our tendency is a lot different than that. Instead, we tend to wallow in our worry. For some of us, that's our go-to. We can imagine every bad scenario. And as we imagine those scenarios, soon that turns to despair because we can't imagine it ever going right again. And that's fed pretty much by our news feed. The news we watch, the social media that we see, it feeds that. And we begin to create an image, a perspective based on what it is that we see. So some of us, we wallow in our worry. For others of us, we drown in self-medication. We're constantly looking for something to ease the tension that we feel, the stress that we feel. And so we begin to pursue things in excess. And it may be excess food or excess alcohol or excess sex or sports or work, or whatever it is that we grab a hold of to say, this brings me some sense of joy, some sense of peace, some sense of normalcy. It drowns out my pain. And we begin to self-medicate. For others of us, we begin to hope in a candidate. We believe there's somebody out there who's going to decide the way we would decide and think the way that we would think. And if they could simply gain the position, then they could do everything the way we would do it. And everything would go so much better. And that's our default. That's our tendency. But God calls us to a huge opportunity to behave differently when he says, be still and know that I am God. See, for you and I, we are focused on a moment. But God is focused on a movement. We're focused on a moment in time. This day, this month, this year, this season that we're walking through right now. And we look at that and that's what we're fixated on. But God is doing something that supersedes time and place and country and nation and ruler, something called the kingdom of heaven. Jesus spoke of that and said that those of us who would follow Jesus, that we are citizens of that kingdom. We're ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is far overarching any particular place or date in time. So if you want a good end to this year and an even better start to the next, then I would suggest that we find that by being still and knowing that He is God. And we can do that in 3 different ways. So I hope that you'll consider these this morning. The first is this: quiet your feed. We've said for a long time that your friends determine the quality and direction of your life. That is true on your news feed as well. The things that you spend time reading, saturating yourself with, commenting on, those things begin to determine how you see the world, how you see how things are going, and how you believe things are unfolding. And it may be a time for you to step back and go, you know what, today we turn it off. Or maybe we don't look at it nearly as long as we did before. We quiet the feed because the things the feed has to say distract us from what God is doing around us. Quiet the feed. The second is evaluate your go-to. Where is it that you find your hope, your calm, your reassurance? What is it that you strive to engage in that will somehow deaden the way that you feel when everything is stressed? It may be that what was once something in moderation has now become something in excess that you need to wean from your life. The only way to do that is if you evaluate it. Is this something that has taken over in my life? The Apostle Paul said that for those of us who would call ourselves Jesus followers, that only one thing should control us. It shouldn't be our desires. It shouldn't be the things that we long for. Instead, it should be God's Spirit. That should be what controls us. Has something gotten out of control in your attempt to deaden the pain? Evaluate your go-to. And then thirdly, repeatedly realign. Repeatedly realign. Now this one, it sounds vague because it would have been far easier to say, trust in God. But trust in God, that's a very spiritual sounding thing, a very churchy sounding thing. But for each of us, we have the opportunity to align our steps with Jesus. That's what we mean when we say that we're going to be a follower of Jesus. And maybe for you, it's a first step to say, God, I don't fully understand all this, but I know you sent Jesus and I want to follow him in my life as my forgiver and my leader. Maybe that's a first step that you take. But for others, it may be, I've made that step, and the step that I need to take is a step daily, maybe daily devotions, where I'm realigning my heart with God. Because the concerns of everyday life, it knocks us out of kilter. It knocks us out of whack. And we read things and hear things and experience things. And what started as I'm going to follow Jesus today ends up way, way different. We've all experienced that. When you've sat in a church service and you're like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that differently. And it lasts till we're about halfway down the sidewalk when somebody bumps into us and we come back with a statement that we weren't even, that's exactly what I was trying not to do. It's a daily realigning. And that's why the weekly realigning is so important as we engage in a church service and we connect in a small group, because it allows us to both learn and process and apply the things that we're studying and growing in on a Sunday. But all of that allows us to repeatedly realign our lives to be truly a follower of Jesus. Hezekiah's song, it included a phrase, kind of a refrain. He repeated it a couple of times. The Lord Almighty is with us. You fast forward a few centuries, and Paul the Apostle writes to the Ephesian believers, and he says that Jesus, at his resurrection, was exalted to a place by God the Father that put him in the position of King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the Lord Almighty. And if we truly believe that Jesus is that Lord Almighty as Jesus followers, then wouldn't it be amazing if the Jesus followers could somehow be that beacon of calm and of confidence and of kindness during a worldwide recalculating? About a week ago, there was a group called the Planet Shakers that released an album that included these words. Said, "You are my defender, my savior for all time. You're my redeemer, forever on my side. You are my provider, my healer for all time. You remain the same, and this will never change. You're over it all." We have a God who's bigger than the storms and bigger than the nations. The King of Kings that has a heavenly kingdom for which those of us who are Jesus followers are citizens and ambassadors. And that means in those moments of confusion, in the meantime, that we can find direction. We find that direction as we are still and watch for God to be at work. In a moment, we're going to sing these words, but first, let me take a second to pray for us. God, thank you that in you we have incredible hope because you're way bigger and way more powerful than anything that we will ever face in our lives. And God, I pray that knowing that for some, the things they're facing are absolutely huge. And it's bigger in their world than a pandemic, and it's bigger than an election or bigger than an upcoming holiday. And God, I pray that as we go through the events of this coming week, that you will remind us so clearly that you are over it all. And because of that, we can both rest and trust in you. Pray these things in Jesus' name.
The world may fade away, but you are here to stay. You are the great I am, the beginning and the end, the calm of every storm, the light of every dawn. You always make a way, and forever you remain. You're over it all. You're over it all. You're over it all. Jesus, you are Lord. You're over it all. You're over it all. You're over it all. Jesus, you are Lord. You're over it all. The highest authority, your word brings clarity, your power rushes in, you're moving once again, you're breaking every chain,
As you head into your week and you experience whatever this week has in store, I hope that you'll give some thought to the words of this song, the truth that Hezekiah penned, that God is indeed over all of it. For those of you who came today prepared to give, there are buckets at the back, or you can go to give.lakeoconee.church and do that digitally. And next week, we're going to have a Thanksgiving message kind of right in advance of Thanksgiving, and make sure that you've got November 29th on your calendar for no morning services, but instead a night of worship. That's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Until then, I hope that you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.